The rain was relentless that night, pounding the windows of our Chicago brownstone like it wanted to break in. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the half-empty bottle of bourbon on the counter, my wife's absence a heavy weight in the air. Then came the knock, 3 sharp raps that jolted me, like fate itself was demanding an answer. I opened the door to find Elias Navarro, soaked to the bone, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his hazel eyes wide with something I couldn't name. At 28, Elias was the kind of man who carried himself like he'd seen too much, but still believed in something better. Lean, with a quiet intensity that made you listen when he spoke. We'd been neighbors for a year, sharing small talk over fences and borrowed tools. But tonight was different. "I need to talk," he said, voice low, almost drowned by the storm. "Can I come in?" My wife, Clara, was in New York for a conference, leaving me alone in a house that felt too big without her. I was 29, Mark Ellison, a high school history teacher with a life that looked perfect on paper, stable job, loving wife, a mortgage we could just afford. But there were cracks, ones I didn't talk about, ones I barely admitted to myself. I nodded, stepping aside. "Sure, Elias. Get out of the rain." He stood dripping in my living room, his jacket a sodden heap on the floor. The air between us felt charged, like the storm had followed him inside. "I'm sorry to barge in," he said, running a hand through his wet hair. "It's just I didn't know where else to go." His voice cracked, and I saw it then. Fear, raw and unguarded, in the way his hands trembled. "What's wrong?" I asked, my teacher's instinct kicking in, the one that made me good at spotting when someone was hiding pain. I gestured to the couch, and he sat, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it held answers. "It's my brother, Mateo," he said finally. "He's in trouble. Big trouble." Elias's voice was steady now, but it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. He explained how Mateo, 25 and reckless, had gotten mixed up with a loan shark in Pilsen, a debt he couldn't pay. Tonight, Mateo had called Elias in a panic, saying men were watching his apartment. Elias had gone to check, only to find the place trashed, a warning scrawled on the wall in red paint. "Pay or disappear." "I can't lose him, Mark," Elias said, his eyes meeting mine. They were pleading, desperate, but there was something else there too. Something that made my pulse quicken in a way I didn't understand. "I don't know what to do. I thought maybe you'd know someone. You're connected, right? You teach at that fancy school." I almost laughed. Connected? I was just a guy who graded papers and argued with teenagers about the Civil War. But Elias was looking at me like I was his last hope, and I couldn't turn away. "I don't know anyone like that," I admitted, "but we'll figure something out. Together." He exhaled, a shaky breath, and for a moment, the room felt smaller, the space between us shrinking. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice soft but piercing. "You barely know me." I didn't have an answer. Not a good one, anyway. Maybe it was the bourbon loosening my guard, or the way his vulnerability mirrored something I'd buried deep. "Because you're here," I said simply. "And you're scared." We spent the next hour piecing together a plan. I suggested calling the police, but Elias shook his head. "Mateo's got a record. They'll lock him up before they help." Instead, we mapped out a way to get Mateo out of the city, maybe to a cousin in Milwaukee, until Elias could scrape together enough money to settle the debt. I offered to chip in what I could, though my savings were thin. Clara and I were saving for a baby, a future we'd planned down to the last detail. But as I looked at Elias, his gratitude shining through the worry, I felt something shift inside me. Something dangerous. The storm eased as we talked, the rain softening to a drizzle. Elias stood to leave, but he paused at the door, turning to face me. "Mark," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "thank you. I mean it." And then, without warning, he stepped closer, his hand brushing mine. It was brief, electric, and it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't explain. I pulled back, my heart pounding, and mumbled something about checking on Mateo tomorrow. When the door closed behind him, I stood there, staring at my hand like it belonged to someone else. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive with something I couldn't name, something that scared me as much as it thrilled me. The next morning, I woke to a text from Elias. "Mateo's safe for now. Can we talk later?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Clara wouldn't be back for 3 days, and the thought of seeing Elias again made my stomach twist in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. I typed back, "Yeah, come by tonight." At school, I was distracted, my mind replaying that moment at the door. I'd always thought of myself as straight, my life with Clara a clear path I'd chosen. But Elias's touch had stirred something, a question I'd never dared ask myself. Was it just the intensity of the moment? Or was it something more? That evening, Elias showed up with a 6-pack of beer and a tired smile. "Mateo's with my cousin," he said, cracking open a bottle. "I owe you, man." We sat on the porch, the city humming around us, and talked about everything. His job as a graphic designer, my obsession with historical documentaries, the way Chicago felt both too big and too small. The conversation flowed easily, but there was an undercurrent, a tension that made every glance feel like a risk. "I've never told anyone this," Elias said suddenly, his voice low, "but I'm bi. Always have been. It's why Mateo and I don't talk to our dad anymore." He looked at me, waiting for a reaction, and I froze. My world had always been black and white. Love was Clara, marriage, a family. But Elias was painting in colors I'd never seen, and I didn't know how to respond. "I didn't know," I said finally, my voice tight. I'm glad you told me." It was a weak response, but it was all I had. He nodded, like he understood the storm brewing inside me, and we sat in silence, the weight of his confession settling between us. Over the next 2 days, we grew closer, working together to keep Mateo safe. Elias came over each night, and our conversations deepened, peeling back layers of ourselves we'd kept hidden. I told him about the pressure I felt to be the perfect husband, the perfect man, while he shared stories of rejection and resilience. Each night, the space between us seemed to shrink, our hands brushing more often, our eyes lingering longer. On the 3rd night, with Clara's return looming, Elias looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "Mark, what are we doing here?" His voice was raw, and I knew he wasn't talking about Mateo anymore. My heart raced, torn between the life I'd built and the pull I felt toward him. I didn't answer, but I didn't look away either. The air in the kitchen was thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. Elias's question hung between us, and I felt the weight of it pressing against my chest. "What are we doing here?" he'd asked, and I had no answer. Only a pulse that wouldn't slow down and a truth I wasn't ready to face. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "I'm married, Elias. I love Clara." It was true, but it felt like a half-truth, a shield I was holding up against something I couldn't name. He nodded, his hazel eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he might lean closer. Instead, he stood, grabbing his jacket. "I should go," he said. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line." He didn't wait for me to respond, just walked out into the Chicago night, leaving me alone with the echo of his words. I sat there for hours, replaying every moment, the way his hand had brushed mine, the way his laugh made my chest ache. I'd never questioned my life before, but now it felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. The next day, I threw myself into work, hoping routine would drown out the noise in my head. But every quiet moment brought Elias back, his voice, his vulnerability, the way he looked at me like he saw something I'd hidden even from myself. Clara was due back that evening, and the thought of facing her filled me with guilt. I hadn't done anything, not really, but the feelings stirring inside me felt like a betrayal. When Clara walked through the door, her suitcase trailing behind her, she smiled that warm, familiar smile that had always grounded me. "Miss me?" she teased, pulling me into a hug. She was 28, with sharp green eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. I held her tightly, hoping her warmth would anchor me, but all I could think about was Elias. That night, as we lay in bed, Clara sensed something was off. "You're quiet," she said, propping herself up on one elbow. "Everything okay?" I wanted to tell her about Elias, about the confusion tearing me apart, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I kissed her, hoping to lose myself in the familiar. But even that felt different, like I was reaching for something I couldn't quite grasp. The next morning, I found a note slipped under our door. "Meet me at the park, 7 p.m. Please. E." My heart skipped. I told Clara I was going for a run, hating the lie as it left my lips. When I reached the park, Elias was waiting by the lake, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the water. He looked tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. "Mateo's okay," he said first, easing into the conversation. "He's staying in Milwaukee for now. I paid off part of the debt, but..." He trailed off, then took a deep breath. "Mark, I need to be honest. I feel something for you. I know you're married, and I'm not trying to ruin that, but I can't pretend it's not there." His words hit me like a punch. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but the truth was clawing its way out. "Elias, I've never..." I stumbled, my voice breaking. "I don't know what I am anymore." He stepped closer, his hand reaching for mine, and this time I didn't pull away. His touch was warm, grounding, and for a moment, I let myself feel it, the possibility, the freedom, the fear. "You don't have to know," he said softly. "Not right now. Just don't run from it." We stood there, hands clasped, the world fading around us. It was the most honest moment of my life, and the most terrifying. I thought of Clara, of the life we'd built, and the man I'd thought I was. But Elias was here, real and raw, and I couldn't look away. That night, I went home to Clara, my mind a war zone. She was cooking dinner, humming softly, and I watched her, torn between love and something new, something I couldn't ignore. Over the next week, Elias and I kept meeting. In the park, at coffee shops, always careful, always fleeting. Each moment with him felt like a step toward a truth I wasn't ready to face, but couldn't turn away from. One evening, as we sat on a bench under a street lamp, Elias told me about his first love, a boy in high school who'd broken his heart. "I thought I'd never feel that way again," he said, his voice low. "Until you." My breath caught, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in, our lips brushing in a kiss that felt like both a beginning and an end. The guilt was immediate, a tidal wave that threatened to drown me. I pulled back, my heart pounding. "I can't do this," I said, standing abruptly. "I'm sorry, Elias. I can't." I walked away, his silence following me like a ghost. The days that followed were a blur of guilt and longing. I avoided Elias, ignoring his texts, steering clear of our usual meeting spots. But every night, I lay awake next to Clara, replaying that kiss, the way it had felt like coming alive and breaking apart all at once. I loved my wife. She was my best friend, my partner. But Elias had unlocked something inside me, a truth I couldn't unsee. Clara noticed the change. "Mark, talk to me," she said one morning over coffee, her green eyes searching mine. "You're slipping away." I wanted to confess, to lay it all bare, but the words felt like a betrayal, not just of her, but of the man I'd been. Instead, I mumbled something about work stress and kissed her forehead, hating myself for the lie. A week later, I ran into Elias at the grocery store, his cart filled with frozen pizzas and a single bottle of wine. He looked worn, his usual spark dimmed. "Hey," he said, his voice cautious. "You okay?" I nodded, though it was a lie. just figuring things out. He didn't push, but his eyes held a quiet hurt that cut deeper than words. We stood there, surrounded by canned goods and fluorescent lights, and I felt the pull again, that undeniable draw toward him. "I miss you," he said simply, and my chest tightened. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Clara, asking me to grab milk. The normalcy of it felt like a lifeline, pulling me back to the life I knew. I mumbled an apology and left, but Elias's words followed me home. That night, Clara confronted me. We were in the living room, the TV muted, the silence heavy. "Mark, I know something's going on," she said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "You're not you anymore. Tell me what it is." I broke then, the weight of it all too much. I told her everything. About Elias, the kiss, the confusion tearing me apart. Her face crumpled, but she didn't cry. She listened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Do you love him?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "I love you, Clara. I always have. But this it's different. It's like I'm seeing myself for the first time." She nodded, her jaw tight. "I need time," she said, standing. "I can't do this right now." She left for her sister's place that night, leaving me alone in a house that felt like a stranger's. The next day, I went to Elias. I found him at his apartment, sketching at his desk, his hands smudged with charcoal. "Clara knows," I said, my voice raw. I told her everything. He set down his pencil, his eyes wide. "What does that mean for you? For us?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I can't keep running from this. I need to understand what it means." We talked for hours, peeling back the layers of fear and shame that had kept me silent for so long. Elias was patient, letting me find my way, but his presence was a steady anchor, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. Over the next weeks, I began to explore who I was, not just as Clara's husband, but as Mark, a man who was maybe bisexual, maybe something else entirely. I started therapy, diving into the questions I'd avoided my whole life. Elias was there, not pushing, but present, his quiet strength a reminder that I wasn't alone. Clara and I started talking again, tentative at first. She was hurt, but she wanted to understand. We went to couples counseling, grappling with what our marriage meant now. I didn't know if we'd stay together, but I knew I owed her honesty, and myself the same. Months passed, and the pieces of my life began to settle, though not in the way I'd expected. Clara and I decided to separate, not out of anger, but because we both deserved to live authentically. It was painful, but it was honest, and in that honesty, we found a new kind of love, not romantic, but rooted in respect and shared history. She moved to a new apartment in Logan Square, and we stayed friends, checking in over coffee, rebuilding something new. Elias and I grew closer, but we took it slow. I was still navigating my identity, learning to embrace the parts of myself I'd buried. We went on dates, quiet dinners, walks by the lake, moments that felt like breathing for the first time. He introduced me to his world, his art, his friends, a community that welcomed me without judgment. I began to see love differently, not as a fixed path, but as a journey, messy and beautiful and ever-changing. One night, under the same street lamp where we'd shared our first kiss, Elias took my hand. "You're braver than you know," he said, his voice soft but sure. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past year lift, replaced by something lighter, hope, maybe, or the promise of something true. Mateo came back to Chicago, his debt settled with Elias's help and a loan from a friend. He was different now, quieter, but healing. I met him one afternoon at a cafe, and he thanked me, his eyes so much like Elias's. "You saved me," he said, and I shook my head. "No," I said. "Elias did. I just showed up." But as I said it, I realized that showing up, being there, being honest, was enough. It was everything. Looking back, that night when Elias knocked on my door changed everything. It broke me open, forced me to face the parts of myself I'd ignored. It wasn't just about falling in love with him. It was about falling in love with the truth. Love, I learned, isn't just a feeling. It's a choice, a risk, a willingness to see and be seen. As I stood with Elias under that street lamp, the city alive around us, I felt it. The courage to be myself, wholly and unapologetically. And that, more than anything, was what he did that night when my wife wasn't home. It haunted me, yes, but it also set me free.